"We don't serve your kind here." The words shattered the crystal silence of the boutique like a hammer on glass. Heads turned. The elderly man with calloused hands stopped mid-sentence, the small velvet box in his weathered palm suddenly heavy with humiliation. 50 years of working in the darkness of diamond mines had never made him feel as small as this moment, standing under the perfect lighting of Cartier. Somewhere among the watching eyes, Leonardo DiCaprio lowered his sunglasses slightly, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused attention. The boutique gleamed with wealth, chandeliers casting prismatic light across glass cases filled with dreams crystallized into carats. The old miner had saved for decades, tracking this particular diamond from the very shaft where his own hands had discovered it. Now it sat transformed, nestled in platinum, wearing a price tag that equaled his yearly pension. Around him, New York's elite browsed casually, their whispers and stares growing as the sales associate's voice rose, emphasizing boundaries the old man had dared to cross. Security shifted toward him, hands reaching for radios. "I just wanted to buy my granddaughter," the miner began, his voice carrying the accent of South African mines. But the sales associate cut him off with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Perhaps you misunderstood our clientele," he said, loud enough for the surrounding customers to hear. "These pieces tell stories worthy of their price." The old man's eyes dropped to his hands, where decades of labor had etched stories of their own. That's when a familiar voice spoke from behind the gathering crowd, words that would change everyone's understanding of value. The elderly miner stood motionless as whispers rippled through the boutique. His name was Isaac Mbeki, though no one there bothered to ask. For 52 years, he had descended into the earth's darkness, following veins of kimberlite through South Africa's unforgiving bedrock. His weathered face carried the map of every tunnel he'd ever crawled through, while his hands, now trembling slightly under the scrutiny of Manhattan's wealthy, bore calluses harder than some of the diamonds they'd unearthed. The sales associate, whose name tag read Preston, maintained his practiced smile, while his eyes conveyed clear disdain. His Savile Row suit cost more than Isaac's modest home back in Kimberley. Preston had perfected this particular smile during his 7 years at the boutique, warm enough to seem professional, cold enough to establish boundaries. "Sir, perhaps I can direct you to our catalog website instead," Preston suggested, his voice honeyed with false concern. "Many people find it more comfortable to browse at home." Around them, customers pretended not to stare while doing exactly that. A woman in Louboutin whispered behind her hand to her companion. A businessman fiddled with his Patek Philippe, the movement a deliberate display of belonging to a world Isaac had merely supplied with its raw materials. Isaac's fingers closed around the small photograph he'd carried in his pocket. It showed his granddaughter, Lorato, in her graduation gown, the first in their family to attend university. He had traced this diamond's journey for years, following export records and auction listings until he discovered it had been set into this particular ring. The Kimberley mines had given his life meaning, but nearly taken it 3 times, once in the collapse that had crushed his left leg, leaving him with a permanent limp barely noticeable as he stood perfectly still, afraid any movement might further mark him as unwelcome. "I know this diamond," Isaac said quietly, his accent thickening with emotion. "I found it myself in the western shaft of the Cullinan, July 17th, 1983. Preston's eyebrows rose, combining amusement and disbelief in perfect proportions. A titter of laughter came from somewhere behind a display case. "Sir, every piece in this establishment comes with a certified history." "A history that begins after it's polished and perfect," Isaac interrupted, unexpected boldness finding his voice. "But diamonds have stories before they reach papers and certificates." Preston's smile thinned, professionalism straining against irritation. He gestured subtly toward security, where a man with an earpiece was already approaching. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for the approaching security guard. Isaac noticed phones emerging from purses and pockets, the wealthy audience anticipating entertainment at his expense. He thought of how differently they would see this diamond if they had felt the weight of earth above them, heard the whispers of ancient stone releasing its treasures after billions of years in darkness. "I've saved every month since I found it," Isaac continued, a tremor in his voice betraying his fading courage, "just to give my Lorado a piece of what her grandfather helped bring into the world." Preston's patience had visibly exhausted itself. "Sir, I'm sure your stories are fascinating, but this is a place of business, not a venue for creative narratives about our merchandise." Just as the security guard reached them, a figure stepped forward from the small crowd of onlookers. Dressed casually in comparison to the boutique's typical clientele, jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who belongs anywhere. The security guard hesitated, recognition flickering across his face. Preston's expression shifted from annoyance to professional alertness, sensing a potential high-value customer interrupting his current problem. Neither immediately recognized Leonardo DiCaprio without the context of red carpets and premieres, but something in his bearing commanded attention. "I'd like to hear the rest of his story," Leonardo said, removing his sunglasses completely. The boutique fell into a deeper silence, recognition spreading through the assembled shoppers like ripples in still water. Preston froze, caught between his immediate instinct to dismiss Isaac and the sudden presence of Hollywood royalty, interested in the very person he'd been trying to remove. "Mr. DiCaprio," Preston recovered quickly, his voice shifting to a rich, welcoming tone reserved for celebrities and billionaires. "What an unexpected pleasure. Perhaps I could show you our newest collection in our private viewing room." Leonardo's gaze never left Isaac's face. "I'm more interested in hearing about the July 17th, 1983 diamond from the western shaft of the Cullinan mine." Phones rose higher now, recording not the humiliation of an old miner, but the unexpected appearance of the star of Titanic, The Revenant, and Blood Diamond, a film where he had portrayed a smuggler navigating the violent world of conflict diamonds in Sierra Leone. Isaac stood straighter, dignity finding its way back into his posture. The security guard retreated a few steps, uncertain of the changing situation. The elderly miner cleared his throat, fingers tracing the velvet box that contained a piece of his life's work. "I was working the western shaft that season," Isaac began, his voice finding strength as Leonardo moved closer, genuinely listening. The earth speaks to miners who listen long enough. "Some mornings you can feel which walls hold secrets." Preston's smile had become fixed, professional instincts warring with discomfort as the store's atmosphere transformed around him. The wealthy customers who had moments ago been prepared to witness Isaac's removal now gathered closer, their attention captured by the unlikely scene unfolding. A Hollywood icon standing shoulder to shoulder with a diamond miner, creating an image more compelling than any advertisement the boutique could design. "That morning the shaft was colder than usual," Isaac continued, his voice gaining confidence as Leonardo listened with genuine interest. "My partner Josiah had called in sick, so I was working alone when my headlamp caught something different in the wall, just a different way the light bounced back. 17 hours into a double shift, hands bleeding through my gloves, I almost walked past it." The boutique had transformed into an impromptu theater, with Isaac at center stage. Even Preston had stopped trying to interrupt, recognizing the undeniable power shift happening in his carefully curated retail space. "I remember the moment it came free from the earth." Isaac's eyes grew distant with memory. 112 carats in its rough form. The foreman tried to claim I hadn't properly documented the find so they could process it without additional payment to me. But I had followed every protocol. He smiled slightly. I even had the foresight to take a photograph with my old Kodak camera. Isaac reached into his worn leather wallet and carefully extracted a faded photograph. In it, a younger version of himself held a rough, unimpressive-looking stone, his face split with pride and exhaustion. Leonardo examined the photo, then glanced at the ring in the display case. "May I?" he asked Preston, who nodded quickly, eager to please the celebrity even as this situation spiraled beyond his control. The actor carefully lifted the 4-carat cushion-cut diamond ring from its velvet throne. "So this is what became of your 112-carat discovery," he mused, holding it under the boutique's perfect lighting. "They lose most of their size in cutting," Isaac explained, "but they gain their fire." A customer who had been pretending to browse nearby edged closer. "How can you be certain this specific diamond came from your discovery? Surely they all look the same once they're processed." Isaac's weathered face creased into a smile, not of condescension, but of understanding. "Every diamond has its fingerprint, ma'am. Inclusions, color patterns, crystal structures, like human DNA. I studied the certification records for this stone." He gestured toward the ring Leonardo held. "The distinctive inclusion pattern matches my documentation from the original find. I followed its journey through the De Beers system, tracked it through 3 auctions, and finally to here." Leonardo examined the ring more closely, tilting it under the light. "So you've literally tracked this diamond across decades just to purchase it for your granddaughter?" Preston, seeing an opportunity to reassert control, stepped forward. "While this is all quite fascinating, Mr. DiCaprio, I must emphasize that our boutique cannot verify personal claims about merchandise origin beyond our official documentation. And regardless," he glanced pointedly at Isaac, "this particular piece is valued at $94,500. The implied message hung in the air, far beyond what a retired miner could afford. Several customers nodded slightly, the familiar boundaries of wealth reasserting themselves in the space. Leonardo turned the ring in his fingers, light dancing through its facets. "In Blood Diamond, I spent months researching how a single stone changes hands, the lives it touches or destroys. But we rarely hear about the people who actually bring these treasures from the earth." He handed the ring back to Preston, but kept his attention on Isaac. "How many diamonds would you estimate you've discovered over your career?" Isaac considered the question. "Thousands, perhaps. Many were industrial grade, but I've helped recover over 200 gem-quality stones large enough for jewelry." Phones continued recording as Leonardo nodded thoughtfully. "And this is the first you've ever tried to purchase?" "The only one that mattered," Isaac replied, pulling out the photograph of his granddaughter again. "Lorato is graduating from medical school next month, the first doctor in our family." His voice swelled with pride. "I wanted her to have something that shows her where she comes from and what her grandfather's hands helped create." Leonardo studied the photograph of Lorato, her graduation gown a vivid contrast to the sterile boutique surroundings. The tension in the room had transformed from embarrassment to something electric with possibility. Even the security guard had drifted back, captivated by the unfolding drama. "You know," Leonardo began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed space, "I've spent most of my career trying to understand the value of things. Not just their price, but their actual worth." He handed the photograph back to Isaac with a gentle reverence that wasn't lost on the watching crowd. "In The Wolf of Wall Street, I played someone who confused money with meaning. For Blood Diamond, I learned how these stones connect people across continents, for better or worse." His eyes swept the boutique, taking in the display cases filled with twinkling fortune. "But I don't think I fully understood until right now." Preston cleared his throat, professional smile firmly in place. Mr. DiCaprio, while this is certainly a touching narrative, we do have pricing standards that reflect the quality and exclusivity of our pieces. I'll cover the difference, Leonardo interrupted, the casual simplicity of his statement landing like a thunderclap in the boutique. Several customers gasped audibly. Camera phones trembled in suddenly unsteady hands. "That's not necessary," Isaac said, pride straightening his shoulders. "I've saved $42,000 over 20 years to buy this ring. I just need them to sell it to me." Leonardo's expression softened with respect. "Your money has more than earned this diamond, but I'd be honored to contribute as someone who's profited from telling stories about mines without ever having to work in one." Preston's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing the calculations happening behind his eyes. The boutique's policy against undesirable customers was colliding spectacularly with the opportunity for publicity that money couldn't buy. "Perhaps," Preston suggested, finding his equilibrium, "we could discuss this in our private consultation room, away from the disruption to other customers?" "Actually," Leonardo countered, gesturing to the rapt audience surrounding them, "I think everyone here is quite invested in seeing how this ends." His smile was friendly but unyielding. "Isaac has waited decades to buy back a piece of his own labor. Let's not make him wait any longer." A middle-aged woman in a Chanel suit who had been quietly observing stepped forward. "I'd like to contribute too." She looked directly at Isaac, something vulnerable flashing across her carefully maintained features. "My father worked 30 years for General Electric. He never saw the final products his hands helped build, but he made sure I understood the dignity in creating something that lasts." She opened her purse, Hermes leather gleaming under the boutique lighting. "Please let me be part of this." The barrier had broken. A businessman with a German accent offered his credit card. A young couple who had been shopping for their own engagement ring approached with nervous smiles. The very crowd that had moments ago been prepared to witness Isaac's humiliation was now participating in his vindication. Preston's face cycled through confusion, calculation, and finally recognition of an unexpected marketing opportunity. With practiced grace, he pivoted. "What we're witnessing today is exactly what makes our pieces special, the stories they carry." Leonardo watched this transformation with a knowing half-smile, the same expression he'd worn in films when observing human nature revealing itself. He turned to Isaac, speaking quietly. "This is happening because of your story, not mine. I just helped them hear it." Isaac's weathered face showed a complex emotion, somewhere between dignity affirmed and the bittersweet understanding that his value became visible to these people only when validated by celebrity and wealth. Preston's professional instincts had fully reasserted themselves, transforming an embarrassing confrontation into a marketing triumph. "In fact," he announced to the assembled crowd, "I think this calls for a special accommodation." He gestured to a junior associate who hurried to the back room. "We would be honored to provide complimentary custom engraving to commemorate this extraordinary circumstance." The boutique had become a stage for collective redemption, the wealthy patrons now eager participants in what they perceived as an act of generosity and justice. Social media status updates were already being composed in their minds, their proximity to both Leonardo DiCaprio and this unexpected moment of humanity providing perfect content for their digital personas. Leonardo observed this transformation with the quiet attention of someone who had spent a lifetime studying human behavior. When the junior associate returned with paperwork and a small tray of champagne flutes, he gently guided the conversation back to its center. "Before we celebrate," he said, his voice cutting through the newly festive atmosphere, "I'd like to hear what Isaac wants to tell his granddaughter when he gives her this ring." The boutique quieted again. Isaac, who had been watching the proceedings with dignified amazement, cradled the velvet box that now held the diamond he had first discovered in darkness decades ago. "I will tell her that nothing valuable comes easily from the earth," he said, his accent carrying the weight of generations of miners, "whether it's diamonds or doctors." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'll tell her that sometimes justice takes time, and that true value isn't in what something costs, but in what it means." He looked directly at Leonardo. "And I'll tell her that sometimes unexpected people remind others to see clearly what has been in front of them all along." The boutique was utterly silent now. Even Preston stood motionless, the rehearsed script of luxury retail temporarily abandoned in the face of authenticity no marketing team could manufacture. The transaction itself was completed with the ceremonial flourish the boutique typically reserved for its highest-profile clients. Isaac's carefully counted savings, bills organized in a worn envelope, some dating back years, were supplemented by Leonardo's discreet arrangement with the manager who had been summoned from his office. Several customers insisted on contributing to the custom engraving and a platinum chain that would transform the ring into a pendant more suitable for a doctor, as the Chanel-suited woman suggested. Throughout the process, phone cameras continued to capture the scene. By the time the manager personally handed Isaac the signature blue box, tied with perfect white ribbon, the first social media posts were already generating thousands of likes. The hashtag #Diamond Justice was trending locally within 30 minutes. Preston, demonstrating the adaptive instincts that had advanced his career, had positioned himself as a facilitator of this heartwarming moment rather than its initial obstacle. "This is what makes our boutique special," he repeated to anyone recording. "Every piece tells a story." Isaac held the box carefully, as though it contained not just a diamond, but the vindication of a lifetime's labor. The security guard who had earlier approached to remove him now held the door open with deferential respect. Outside the boutique, the early evening had painted Manhattan in shades of amber and shadow. Leonardo walked with Isaac to the corner, deliberately slowing his pace to accommodate the older man's slight limp. Away from the performative atmosphere of the store, their conversation became more genuine. "Your granddaughter," Leonardo said. "She's studying medicine where?" "Johns Hopkins," Isaac replied, pride evident in every syllable. "Scholarship and loans. She works nights at the hospital cafeteria." He patted his jacket pocket where the blue box now rested. "She would not approve of this expense, but some things a grandfather must do anyway." Passing pedestrians began to recognize Leonardo, creating the familiar ripple of awareness that followed him everywhere. He ignored it with practiced ease, keeping his attention on Isaac. "My foundation works with mining communities in several countries," he explained. "We're always looking for advisors who understand both the realities of extraction and the communities affected by it." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "If you'd be willing to share more of your experiences, my team would value your perspective." Isaac accepted the card with careful hands, the simple exchange representing another boundary crossed, from extraction laborer to recognized expert. By midnight, the video had accumulated over 2 million views. Entertainment news sites scrambled to piece together the full story, reaching out to the boutique for official statements. Preston found himself giving 3 interviews before closing, carefully recounting how the store had recognized the unique opportunity to honor the journey of this particular diamond. Lorato called her grandfather from Baltimore, her voice trembling between laughter and tears after seeing him go viral. "Grandpa, you're trending on Instagram. My classmates can't believe it's you." Isaac, back in his modest hotel room, cradled the phone and smiled. "Did I embarrass you, child?" "Never," she answered fiercely. "You've spent your life bringing beauty from darkness. It's time people saw that." Leonardo's publicist fielded dozens of requests for comments, releasing only a brief statement. "Some stories remind us to look beyond surface value to find true worth." In the weeks that followed, three major jewelry retailers announced new artisan recognition programs, promising to acknowledge the miners behind their precious gems. A documentary filmmaker reached out to Isaac about a potential series on the human stories behind luxury items. But perhaps most significantly, when Lerato Mbeki, M.D., graduated the following month, the pendant she wore caught the light in a way that seemed to contain both fire and history. A legacy crystallized, finally visible to all who took the time to truly see.